Father still continued to hear me, but he was so great a servant of God, that for his sake he was willing to expose himself to everything, and so he bade me not to offend God, nor to depart from the directions he gave me. He told me also not to fear about his leaving. He always comforted and encouraged me, and commanded me never to conceal anything from him. And should I observe this command, he told me, that though it were the devil, he would not be able to do me any harm, but rather that our Lord would draw good out of the evil which the devil wished to do my soul. He wished to advance me in all things, as well as he could, and I, being in such fear, obeyed him in everything, though imperfectly. He had a great deal of trouble with me for more than 3 years, during which I confessed to him, in the midst of these afflictions and the great persecutions I underwent, for our Lord allowed people to form a bad opinion of me. And these afflictions came, many of them at least, without any fault of mine, so that I was always coming to the Father, and he was blamed on my account, though he was not in any fault whatever. I think it would have been impossible for him to have endured all these troubles so long, had he not been a man of great sanctity. But our Lord animated him, and enabled him to bear so much, for he had to answer every one who thought I was a lost soul. But they believed him not. And, on the other hand, he had to calm my mind, and to draw me out of the fear I had, by threatening me with a greater. He had also to satisfy me in another respect. For with regard to every vision which was new, our Lord permitted me afterwards to have great fears. All this came from my having been and being still so great a sinner. Still he comforted me with much compassion, and had he followed his own opinion, I should not have suffered so much, for God enabled him to understand the truth in all things, and I believe that the sacrament of penance gave him light to direct me. Those other servants of God, who could not make themselves sure of my being directed by God, often conversed with me, and when I used to be carelessly speaking of some things, they would understand them in a different manner. Now one of these I loved much, for my soul was exceedingly indebted to him, and he was a very holy man. I was much troubled to see that I could not make myself understood by him, while he, on the other hand, desired my spiritual good with all his heart and soul, and prayed that our Lord would enlighten me. And so when I used to be relating things to them without reflection upon what I said, it seemed to them to be a sign of little humility in me, and when they saw me commit some fault, and they might have noticed many, all condemned me immediately. Sometimes they asked me some questions, and I answered them with candor and even without reflection. Then they thought I wished to teach them, and that I considered myself to be very clever, and accordingly they would go to my confessor to complain, because they certainly wished me well, and he reprimanded me. This lasted a long time, and I was afflicted in many ways, but as I received many favors from our Lord, I was able to endure every trouble. I mention all these things that we may understand what trouble it is not to have a director who is experienced in the ways of the Spirit. Hence, if our Lord had not favored me so much as he did, I know not what would have become of me, since there were circumstances sufficient to have deprived me of my senses, and sometimes I saw myself in such a state that I knew not what to do with myself, except to lift up my eyes to our Lord, because the persecution which I endured from good men, and I who was such a weak and wicked poor creature, and also so timorous, may perhaps seem scarcely worth relating. And though during my life I have passed through very great troubles, yet this last I have found to be the most severe I ever experienced. God grant that by this trouble I may have been able to serve His Majesty a little, for I am sure that those who accused and condemned me promoted His service, and all tended to my greater good. End of chapter 28.